Economics is the study of the use of scarce resources which have alternative uses. In other words, economics studies the consequences of decisions that are made about the use of land, labor, capital, and other resources that go into producing the volume of output which determines a country's standard of living. Those decisions and their consequences can be more important than the resources themselves. For there are poor countries with rich natural resources and countries like Japan and Switzerland with relatively few natural resources but high standards of living. The values of natural resources per capita in Uruguay and Venezuela are several times what they are in Japan and Switzerland, but income per capita in Japan and Switzerland is about double that of Uruguay and several times that of Venezuela. The decisions that influence such outcomes are not only the decisions of individuals, or industrial or agricultural enterprises, or the policies of governments. Among the major decisions affecting economic outcomes are decisions about what kinds of enduring institutions a society has for making those decisions, what kind of economic system, operating within what kind of legal system, and controlled by what kind of political system. In analyzing all these decisions and examining the evidence of their consequences, it is crucial to keep in mind at all times that the resources being used are both scarce and have alternative uses. When a politician promises that his policies will increase the supply of some desirable goods or services, the question to be asked is, at the cost of less of what other goods and services? What does scarce mean? It means that what everybody wants adds up to more than there is. What this implies is that there are no easy win-win solutions, but only serious and sometimes painful trade-offs. This may seem like a simple thing, but its implications are often grossly misunderstood, even by highly educated people. For example, a feature article in the New York Times laid out the economic woes and worries of middle-class Americans, one of the most affluent groups of human beings ever to inhabit this planet. Although this story included a picture of a middle-class American family in their own swimming pool, the main headline read, "The American Middle, Just Getting By." Other headings in the article included, "Wishes Deferred and Plans Unmet Goals That Remain Just Out of Sight, Dogged Saving and Some Luxuries." In short, middle-class Americans' desires exceed what they can comfortably afford, even though what they already have would be considered unbelievable prosperity by people in many other countries around the world, or even by earlier generations of Americans. Yet both they and the reporter regarded them as just getting by, and a Harvard sociologist was quoted as saying, "How budget-constrained these people really are." But it is not something as man-made as a budget which constrains them. Reality constrains them. There has never been enough to satisfy everyone completely. That is the real constraint. That is what scarcity means. Although per capita real income in the United States increased 51% in just one generation, these middle-class families have had to work hard for their modest gains, according to a Fordham University professor quoted in the same article. However, it is doubtful whether most other people in the world would regard Americans' work in air-conditioned offices with coffee breaks as hard, or their standard of living as just getting by. Still, the situation seemed to be viewed as not wholly satisfactory and perhaps even puzzling by the people themselves. The New York Times reported, "To all these people, from academia and journalism as well as the middle-class people themselves, it apparently seemed strange somehow that there should be such a thing as scarcity, and that this should imply a need for both productive efforts on their part and personal responsibility in spending. Yet nothing has been more pervasive in the history of the human race than scarcity, and all the requirements for economizing that go with scarcity. Regardless of our policies, practices, or institutions, whether they are wise or unwise, noble or ignoble, there is simply not enough to go around to satisfy all our desires to the fullest. Unmet needs are inherent in these circumstances, whether we have a capitalist, socialist, feudal, or other kind of economy. These various kinds of economies are just different institutional ways of making trade-offs that are inescapable in any economy. Economics is not just about dealing with the existing output of goods and services as consumers. It is also, and more fundamentally, about producing that output from scarce resources in the first place, turning inputs into output. Not only scarcity, but also alternative uses are at the heart of economics. If each resource had only one use, economics would be much simpler. But water can be used to produce ice or steam by itself, or innumerable mixtures and compounds in combination with other things. Nitroglycerin is a powerful explosive, but it is also used medically to ease chest pains. Similarly, from petroleum comes not only gasoline, kerosene, and fuel oil, but also plastics and Vaseline. Iron ore can be used to produce steel products ranging from paper clips to automobiles to the frameworks of skyscrapers. How much of each resource should be allocated to each of its many uses? Every economy has to answer that question, and each one does, in one way or another, efficiently or inefficiently. Doing so efficiently is what economics is all about. Different kinds of economies are essentially different ways of making decisions about the allocation of scarce resources, and those decisions have repercussions on the life of the whole society. During the days of the Soviet Union, for example, that country's industries used more electricity than American industries used, even though Soviet industries produced a smaller amount of output than in countries such as Japan or Germany. Such inefficiencies in turning inputs into outputs translated into a lower standard of living. In a country richly endowed with natural resources, perhaps more richly endowed than any other country in the world. Russia is, for example, one of the few industrial nations that produces more oil than it consumes. But an abundance of resources does not automatically create an abundance of goods. In early 21st century China, 7 times as much energy has been used to produce a given value of output as Japan uses to produce that same value of output. Here again, huge differences in efficiency have meant huge differences in standards of living for millions of human beings. Efficiency in production, the rate at which inputs are turned into output, is not just some technicality that economists talk about. It affects the life of whole societies. When visualizing this process, it helps to think of the real things, the iron ore, petroleum, wood, and other inputs that go into the production process, and the food, furniture, and automobiles that come out the other end, rather than think of economic decisions as being simply decisions about money. Although the word economics suggests money to some people, for a society as a whole, money is just an artificial device to get real things done. Otherwise, the government could make us all rich by simply printing more money. It is not money but the volume of goods and services which determines whether a country is poverty-stricken or prosperous. Economics is not about the financial fate of particular individuals or particular enterprises. It is about the material well-being of society as a whole. When economists analyze prices, wages, profits, or the international balance of trade, for example, it is from the standpoint of how decisions in various parts of the economy affect the allocation of scarce resources in a way that raises or lowers the material standard of living of the people as a whole. Economics is not simply a topic on which to express opinions or vent emotions. It is a systematic study of what happens when you do specific things in specific ways. In economic analysis, the methods used by a Marxist economist like Oscar Lange did not differ in any fundamental way from the methods used by a conservative economist like Milton Friedman. It is these basic economic principles that this book is about. While there are controversies in economics, as there are in science, this does not mean that the basic principles of economics are just a matter of opinion, any more than the basic principles of chemistry or physics are just a matter of opinion. Einstein's analysis of physics, for example, was not just Einstein's opinion as the world discovered at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Economic reactions may not be as spectacular or as tragic as of a given day, but the worldwide depression of the 1930s plunged millions of people into poverty, even in the richest countries, producing malnutrition in countries with surplus food, probably causing more deaths around the world than those at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Conversely, when India and China, historically 2 of the poorest nations on earth, began in the late 20th century to make fundamental changes in their economic policies, their economies began growing dramatically. It has been estimated that 20 million people in India rose out of destitution in a decade. In China, the number of people living on $1 a day or less fell from 374 million, 1/3 of the country's population in 1990, to 128 million by 2004, now just 10% of a growing population.